Put a link to the minutes in the chat. Give another 30 seconds before we get going. Just a reminder, if you could put your name in the attendance list on the meeting notes, it would be appreciated. Thank you.
Oh, Ava, you can join us today. Wonderful.
Sorry, Ava, I didn't realize you were back, so I just presumed you were still on vacation. So.
That is fair, but no, I'm back, catching up. Don't assume I know what's happened, while I was off. Still catching up. But,
well, welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, well, we're 5 minutes in. We'll go ahead and get started. I know Dan will not be able to make it today. Looking at the rest of TAC attendance, we have myself, Josh, Ava, Luke, Krob, which means we're just missing Abhishek. First on the agenda, we have 2 project updates per our normal cadence. The first one comes from the Best Practices Working Group. Krob, I guess I'll hand it over to you.
Groovy. Thanks, Bob. Can you hear me?
Yeah, just fine.
Excellent. Unfortunately, I did not have time to make a delightful presentation to share with you, so I just typed it in the GDoc here. But the Best Working Group has been very busy. You may have noticed a press release during OpenSSF Day at the Open Source Summit Europe, where we officially unveiled the fact we have created 2 guides around best practices around development. The first one is a guide to developing more secure software. And then we also created a guide for developers to evaluate open source software. Good feedback from the group at the conference, and good commentary from what I've seen from our interactions subsequently. So we're pretty happy with those. Just before, some of our members, Laurent and a few others, worked with the NPM community, and they had released a NPM best practices guide, and that came a week or 2 before the summit. But they put this guide together in collaboration with the NPM community. Lots of very good feedback on that. Actually, there was a session that touched on it at the OpenSSF Day, so we're pretty happy with that. So in all, we've done a lot of writing and sharing with the community. Turning our attention to the education SIG, progress on the plan rewrite continues. There's a link to our Git repo if you want to read kind of where we are. We are working on creating a matrix of all existing training resources that we're aware of, and we're trying to understand, what we can lean into and where there are gaps in the current common body of knowledge that we need to generate new content for. We're developing a delightful and fun new little honk mascot that I'm going to pass over to Jennifer someday. I have a whole bunch of them from all the working groups and SIGs I'm associated with. So we got some great team feedback on a non-conventional learner goose. And then the members of the group, we are working on a task that was identified as part of the CERT SIG, that we don't have a definitive dictionary, a glossary of terms on when we use certain words, what they mean. So we have a couple of our members working on that. And then I have a proposal we'll talk about a little bit later, specific to that item. Any questions or comments on the Best Working Group?
I feel obligated to correct you and call it the Best Practices Working Group out of fairness to others. You guys are prolific. The output is prolific when nobody can argue that. So
Details.
I know, right?
I will take your feedback on our non-floor.
We say it's the Best Practices Working Group.
Gotcha.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. All right, next we have SigStore on the agenda. Luke, I believe you're speaking to the project.
Yes, so let me work out how to share. Okay, does that look good? Yeah, okay, so Sigstore. Sounds like somebody's putting their cutlery away in a drawer there. Okay, maybe it's a mechanical keyboard. Okay, so Sigstore. So not as much as last time, but we got a few things. So this month, in fact, October the 25th will be SigStoreCon. Okay, it's a co-located event with KubeCon and Cloud Native Con North America. And I'm reading off the reel here, but it's focused on adoption stories, ecosystems, engagement, and roadmap updates. And the talks are all settled now. Speakers are notified, and we're just getting together the logistics of the event itself. So looking forward to that. The other item is we have a new timestamp service. So there's going to be a timestamp service which can be run externally to Recall, our transparency log. And this uses RFC 3161, which we've used in the past. And I'm not sure the repo's been transferred as yet, but that will be its home there. The other updates are on Sigstore GA. So our staging and production environment has been up and running for a while. It's been stability has been good. We had a small outage last week from a DNS swap over, but that was resolved very quickly. We were speaking about sort of 11 to 12 minutes there. So it's pretty impressive to see that addressed. We now are up to 12 community SREs. We just recently had 3 more that have joined. Okay. And it's pretty impressive to see what they've got together. There's PagerDuty and lots of folks shadowing each other, supporting each other, lots of interesting playbooks that have been developed. Recall and Fulcio 1.0 are imminent for this week. Okay, so we will hopefully be shipping a 1.0 release of both of those, which is a kind of a key signifier around our GA. And then our GA announcement, because we're not in GA yet, will likely coincide with SigStoreCon. That is the idea. So there will be a small announcement as to what constitutes GA. What does that mean? And what does that signal to the community? And that's it for this month.
Great. Any questions for Luke?
I'm not a TAC member, but is it okay if I ask a question, Bob?
Sure.
So I want to ask a question, but I don't want this to sound an attack because it's not.
Here we go.
Yeah, no. I love listening, believe it or not, to air traffic control report after reports. So, hey, DNS down briefly, you got it back up. Good job. What can we do to decrease? Are you looking into ways to decreasing the likelihood of problems like that in the future? I'm not beating on you having a problem. It's
no, sure, yeah. So the root cause was actually the Linux Foundation.
Oh no.
Yeah, so there is a requirement that projects have their DNS registrar with sigstore.dev. I don't want to say it's entirely the LF's problem. It was an unforeseen result of DNSSEC. Okay. And so luckily, I mean, all dues, the engineer that picked up the ticket was pretty quick to respond. Okay. But I mean, this is probably not a topic for now, but if we had DNS sigstore.dev, under our control, then we would be able to react even more quickly. But there was every time, I say every time, there hasn't been that many times, but whenever something like this happens, we do due diligence afterwards. There's an RCA that we perform to look at what lessons can be learned.
That's what I'm looking for. So
yeah.
You've done a root cause and you think you've identified ways to counter that in the future. Yeah,
very much. Yeah.
Excellent.
So every time there is an event like that, there will be a pull request go up to our community repo where somebody will initially stage what happened, what we learned, what we could do better next time. But then there'll be some review from other community members that can add and, feedback and so forth. Yeah.
I think that's all anyone can ask for. That's awesome. Cool. Thank you.
See a hand up from Mela.
Hey, so one of the, I did bring this up to Luke in Slack before, but I was curious from a tax perspective, you know, six door and the components, I think it's like 3 or 4 components underneath, they're kind of getting adopted very rapidly. And I'm concerned that there's not enough support from the community to help adoption for on-prem. So is there a way that, you know, maybe we can increase support for those trying to adopt that are having issues trying to do this on-prem? Maybe could there be funding allocation for this? I just know that OpenSSF, from my point of view, it seems that they want folks to use six door, but if there isn't support for that adoption, I feel like we may not be successful if people want to use this on-prem.
So, I mean, we, as a community, we could always look to have a, for example, a Slack channel or somewhere that people could raise, it'd probably be issues specific to problems that they're having. It's, yeah, it's, I guess it's a little bit sticky because we can't really give commercial support as a community, but yeah, I would certainly be open to, as you know, I can't speak for the whole of the SIG store community and the TAC, but I'd certainly be receptive to looking at what we could do.
All right, any other questions? Luke, I know there was a question in chat around providing a link to the slide, so I tagged you in the meeting minutes. So if you could provide a link, that would be appreciated.
Cool. Yeah, will do.
Thank you. All right, next on the agenda, we have a governing board meeting coming up in 2 days, and I know given a couple of past meetings, we've had some changes in terms of the folks that are invited to that meeting, as well as the format of the overall meeting. So first off, I just wanted to remind folks that A, you are invited. I believe Jory sent out a note to the mailing list, as well as specific invites to all TAC members. You're strongly encouraged to attend if you can make it. I did want to give Brian a minute to talk about kind of the meeting structure and what he's proposing, as well as part of that structure is the TAC giving an update on the activity of the foundation, as well as a quick synopsis of highlights, lowlights, and opportunities for improvement. So Brian, maybe if you just want to quickly frame the meeting, and then I can jump into the current list of bullets that I've pulled together for the TAC content that I'd like to socialize for feedback.
Sure. Let me start with one important clarification. It's the 7 members of the TAC who are invited to that first portion of the governing board meeting on Thursday, not everyone on this call. Just for most folks listening to hearing that, I just wanted to provide that clarity. The second is, there's lots of conversation, lots of people thinking about how do you increase the bandwidth between the governing board and the TAC, and do that in a way that's appropriately structured and where roles about how different things work are clarified and that sort of thing. And to help accelerate that, we thought as a regular part of governing board meetings going forward, we would have a perhaps overly structured, but let's try this as we go, portion of Thursday's meeting where for 10 minutes, we'd like the TAC to kind of say, not a comprehensive review, obviously there's way too much going on, but what are some of the interesting things that have happened in the last month that they think the governing board should know about, should be interested in, and that sort of thing, and then reserve some portion of those 10 minutes for questions from members of the governing board to ask them. And I suggested in my email actually to the TAC members that it'd be a single slide worth of updates. Here's a few recent announcements or some issues you're grappling with, or that sort of thing that you'd love to engage the governing board on. Then a second 10-minute section that would be about questions the TAC has for the governing board. Open-ended, curated by Bob, perhaps, to get, perhaps the right set of what you can really do in 10 minutes, which is probably, 2 or 3 questions at most. But as a way to not pipeline everything through either me or through like the formal agenda, but to allow for a little bit more open-ended questions and conversations. And just to try to address a point that had been brought up in a previous presentation by Eric and Mark and Bob to the board, which said that the TAC is blocked on a couple of things for lack of guidance from the governing board. So this is an attempt to try to start to answer those issues and unblock where possible. So so the suggestion was that the TAC could submit those questions to Bob, and we'd be able to distribute those ideally by tonight, so that governing board members would have, tomorrow during the day to read through those questions and think about their answers to it, and also to read the status so that we can optimize those 20 minutes together.
Thanks, Brian. And just as an FYI, your volume is on 11, so you may want to tune that down. It was pretty broken up for me. So I guess in that vein, I did want to quickly, before we get into the meat of the discussion, I did want to poll the TAC members that are here on the call, just to get a sense in terms of who will be able to attend the meeting on Thursday. So perhaps just if you could raise the hand in Zoom as an indication. See, Crow is a yes. I will be there. Josh will be there.
I have to leave after a little bit. I don't know if I'll make the whole thing, but I'll definitely be there.
Got it. And just one other clarification, Brian, you may have said this and I forgot, but it's an hour-and-a-half long session. The first 45 minutes will be in open, where the TAC will be invited and engaged in that conversation. The last half is a closed session given hiring and budget discussions. So it would only be a 45-minute request of TAC members for this meeting. So it looks like we'll have a handful of folks, but not necessarily quorum at the meeting on Thursday. In the interest of pulling together the brief updates, I did start a doc, and I will share it more broadly. I realized I created it under my Google account, which I can't share wide open to the world against that. So apologies, but I will switch that over to something that can be shared more widely after this call.
Muted.
Bob, I think you went on mute.
Bob, you need to unmute.
Apparently Bob's speakers aren't working either.
No, like, why does it put me on mute if I'm sharing a screen? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. Let me try this again. Apologies.
Very strange. You're right. It muted you again.
Yep. As soon as you share it.
What about now? Can folks hear
Yeah, we
me?
can hear you now.
Yep, we can hear you now. Excellent.
Thanks to whoever unmuted me as the host. So can folks see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the highlights here, again, were meant to be a quick data capture. Apologies for any omissions that may have occurred. They were not intentional by any stretch of the imagination. It was more of me trying to do a quick brain dump to net this out. I think hopefully the highlights are not controversial. I would say when I share this doc out later, if people see a glaring omission, feel free to call that out now. I think where the bulk of the conversation today on this meeting needs to focus around, instead of the great work that's going on within the foundation, areas for improvement, as well as the lights that are listed here. And I tried to quickly capture some of the feedback that I've heard in previous TAC meetings, as well as some of the governing board dialogue over the past few sessions. So I know I'm essentially asking you to read a Google Doc live on a meeting, which isn't ideal, but just to quickly kind of touch on some of the lowlights that are here. I think we've had a fair bit of discussion around the role of the TAC in terms of how we are chartered currently under the foundation versus what is the desired operating model. And I think we have some continued confusion there that we are working to resolve, but again, is still present at this moment. I would say that part of that is, in my opinion, rooted around lots of the great work that exists around the foundation, but being able to collapse that into a coherent mission statement that everybody understands, agrees with, and we have an organizational structure that is supportive of that work. I think there's a lot of different operating models and a lot of great things going on, but making sure that we are focused and set up for success is ultimately something that I think we're all after in this effort. Other things that I pointed out, we did ratify PR 112 and have a project governance process in place, which is awesome. I would point out that we don't have a ton of candidates to include in the foundation in terms of net new projects. So calling out, is that okay? Is that not okay? Thinking through, if it's not what we expect, then maybe doing some analysis around how are we positioning the foundation to the broader community. Do we have a demand generation problem, and making sure folks are aware that that is something that the OpenSSF offers? Is it a value proposition in terms of gives and gets, and making sure that what we can offer projects is compelling? Another comment that I'll make here is around much of the good work that we have going on. We have a fair number of best practices documents, and I think there's probably some natural overlap just based on where we are with the space, but I think that there's probably an opportunity for us to make sure that we're not flooding the market with minor deviations of the same document, and that we have some isolation and consistency in terms of how we message and how we drive that through our advocacy work with other projects and foundations. And then finally, I have the bullet we called out here around kind of communications between the staff, the governing board, and the TAC. I think we have taken some actions to this. I think even this upcoming meeting this week, I think is certainly a step forward to driving a more inclusive and transparent narrative. But I would call that out as a low light that's been a challenge. So before we jump into the opportunities, I guess I know I threw a ton out there. Let me pause and call for any feedback. If folks disagree with things, would love to hear it. If people see omissions, would love to hear that. So I'll pause and see if there's any comments.
I have no problem with your list, Bob. Sorry to jump.
Any other TAC members with feedback before I go to Sarah?
I think it looks great. Well done.
I think the only comment I have is in the lowlights, some of the parentheticals might be, I might have opinions on the things in the parentheticals that I would change. I'm happy to follow up on those. The non-parenthetical parts I agree with.
I just gave all TAC members edit access, so feel free to jump in. Again, apologies for others that don't have it. I'll clean that up after the call. And again, this was more of a brain dump from my perspective. So again, not exactly. I will clean this up ahead of Thursday and send that out to folks so that they have awareness by the end of the day. But I'm not hearing any dissension from TAC members around the lowlights. Sarah, you have your hand raised.
Just to bring forward the moment I spent, or the comment I put in the chat, that I think this group is very different from other LF organizations where we say, come one, come all, bring your projects, we will help curate later. I think this is more of a curation first, kind of, we want to seek the projects where we can drive consensus on a project for the industry. I think this is much more opinionated than a lot of the other other LF umbrella projects. So I don't see that having a small number of projects seeking inclusion is a problem at the moment. So that was just my comment in the chat, and more than anything, it's just kibitzing. So I will lower my hand and go back to mute.
Oh, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe that's not considered a low light. It's just a fact. Is that
for me? It wouldn't be a low light, but I'm also not on the TAC. Like I said, I'm kibitzing, but I wanted to offer my thoughts, and we'll see where we go from there because that is all TAC decision.
Yeah, I think that's fair feedback. As the person that wrote it, I guess let me posit this as a response. I would have expected a small number of projects to want to come along and engage the effort. I think if we had 1,000, that's probably a low light in terms of positioning. To your point, I think we're not intending to go after that sort of a strategy, but there are a fair number of open source security projects out there that are not part of a foundation today. And I would say, again, maybe that's a question that we need to shift under the opportunity banner versus calling it out as a low light to say, should we be more deliberate around recruiting? Should we be more articulate about that point in how we talk about the foundation's activity? So I'd be totally open to shifting that out maybe as an open question rather than calling it a low light, but I would have expected a little bit more proposals coming in.
I would love to see it moved as a recruiting, like have the TAC say this, we've looked at a bunch of projects. This one's really neat. We want to pull it in. Like that to me seems like a really great thing. But again, it's very different from other LF orgs. And now.
Got it. I see several hands up, so I'm not sure who was first. Ava, you're first on my screen, so apologies if that's breaking.
I know that I was not first. I think it was Brian, Jeffrey, and then myself.
Okay, always happy to defer on this to TAC members though, but just a real quick point. I think for the purposes I was envisioning, which is that this would spawn some conversation within that 10-minute window, I think this is a lot to even present in that 10 minutes, let alone solicit for comment back. And so one thing I would encourage, both for highlights, lowlights, and opportunities questions, is can you drill it down to the 2 or 3 most important things? Presuming for highlights that they can go read the blog, presuming for lowlights, there's always more we can deal with, but like what are the most urgent things that you might want either the governing board to know or feedback from them on? And is my mic better? Hopefully it's better.
Yes,
it is better. Thanks, Brian. And again, the interest here is not to present this full list. It is to cull this down. But in the interest of making sure that we had quorum around what were the critical points that needed to get discussed, I wanted to start open and then try to narrow afterwards. Jeff, I believe you were next.
Thanks. I just wanted to plus one on Sarah's comment about this is different than many other LF projects and looking to be more opinionated. And so just simply moving that bullet to the opportunities questions section would be another rational way of handling it, which looks like it's happening. So nice write-up. Thank you, Bob.
Yep, Ava.
Yeah, overall feedback, I was going to go kind of where Brian went, in that I think we can pull a lot of the highlights up to 1 or 2 things to say, hey, the machinery is working much better. Here's a list of or a reference to all the outputs from that machinery, from the org, the blog posts, all these changes, the working groups collaborating, and we now have a defined pipeline for projects to join. So the opportunity then is for projects to use the pipeline we just defined. I would sort of extract it all to look at the process we've been building and what parts of the process have accomplished, what opportunities there are to now engage in that process, and areas where the process is not yet defined, which you've got a couple here still that we are working on.
Nope, I think that's great feedback. Thank you for that. All right, so based on that, I did move that down as Jeff noted. I think that's certainly appropriate. I guess moving on, hopefully folks can still read everything underneath the opportunities section here. Thoughts that I had pulled in here. One was, and I'll say this out loud just so it's totally clear. I don't raise term length as a self-serving question in any stretch of the imagination here. I do raise it from the concern around getting forward momentum and thinking about, to Sarah's earlier point, we are not the same foundation as many others. So actually having an active conversation around, is 1 year long enough? Do we have the right numbers of members of TAC here to support the activities of the foundation? Thinking through the structure in terms of how many are elected from the community versus how many are appointed by the governing board. I do think that is an interesting dynamic to talk through as we think about some of the other questions here around what is the responsibility of the TAC in terms of advocacy and outreach, managing grant proposals, curating the overall technical strategy. We could make some progress in a year, but ultimately if we see major turnover in TAC, we may end up in a perpetual cycle of always trying to relearn context make a few little projects here and there, or little notes of progress here and there, and then ultimately, with other things going on in the industry and our own day jobs per se, that may be a challenge. So just thinking about term length and size are two dimensions here that I don't necessarily want to take for granted, and I think are maybe useful things to discuss with the governing board. I see the comment in chat from Crow. Ava, was your hand raised for a comment on that, or was it just from before?
My hand was raised to just note the line I added, which you were talking about the TAC composition. I'd also point out the definition of our electorate is a thing we kind of hand waved really quickly last year. We all got some quick agreement on it. I wasn't on the TAC, but I was, behind the scenes chatting with folks about how do you define electorates and foundations. And to Sarah's point, this one is structured quite differently than a lot of others. So, if we're looking at TAC composition, TAC size, we should also look at TAC electorate. Again, because the org has evolved considerably in the past 12 months. We might arrive at the same process as last time, but it's a question to put on the table.
I think it's a fair point. Thanks for raising it in the chat. I think staggered terms was raised by Vicky, and I also think that's a very valid point. And what I'm trying to avoid is the problem I just described of we lose context, we lose momentum, we have to reestablish trust. And since that many of the communication challenges that we have here are all founded on human relationships and trust, I think it's important that we consider these dynamics as we talk about the future. Next bullet here that I have highlighted. Sorry, Naveen, you have your hand raised?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to play devil's advocate on the TAC term. Okay. There are, I'm not going to say which, there are countries who do the same thing. You know what they say? I'm the elected official. I have my Politburo. I'm going to change my terms. We shouldn't become like that. Again, this is my opinion. Make this open and let everybody know in a GitHub discussion so that everybody is aware of it instead of it being in a Google Doc or inside the meeting, because it helps everybody, gets everybody an opportunity to voice my 2 cents on that. I'm going to stop here. Thanks.
Appreciate the input, Naveen. Like I said in the framing, I'm not saying this from my own personal agenda or anything else. I think it's just a sense of, for the health of the organization, thinking through this and being deliberate around that. Making that decision and then committing to it, I think, is what's important here. The next bullet I have highlighted here is around asking the question, do we have sufficient staff and sufficient documented processes that we are set up to success around supporting the efforts of not just the TAC itself, because as I will remind folks, we are all individuals clearly passionate about the space. We all have day jobs to go along with that, and so the amount of time and energy that we can dedicate to the role of TAC member is limited. So thinking through, again, in the framing of, we want to make this foundation successful, should we be more aggressive in making asks of the governing board and the staff in terms of things that we need help with, oversight that we need, other administrative support? I think if we're going to set this group up to be successful, we need to ask ourselves that question, because I think there is strong desire from the governing board, at least from what I've heard, and would defer to Brian to add color here if he'd like. But I think they want to see this foundation be successful. That's why they're here. That's why they're engaged. So if we have asks around areas that we need more support as a TAC, or we see working groups or projects needs more support, I think this is something that we should be thinking about raising. So Brian, I see your hand up.
Yeah. One thing I'll add, certainly resourcing is a question that is a very big one and kind of goes beyond just kind of the needs of the TAC to lots of different things. And but one thing that comes to mind as well is the question has been raised a couple of times about the size of the TAC and whether it's appropriate. And one connection has been made to the size of the membership of the organization, which I think is perhaps less important than the question of what is the TAC being asked to do, and is that a reasonable workload And would actually more TAC members help, divide and conquer that work a little bit, so that more can be done, especially with the TAC expected to play a very opinionated role in curating a best of breed set of projects. It's a lot more work in some ways than just saying yes to everyone that looks mature enough, right? So, or being involved in the mobilization plan and the role that people think is appropriate as a vetting, kind of community. So I think size of the TAC should be either a separate item or at least it's very tightly associated with that question. One more point as well that came to mind is the staff is here to help, the staff is here to support. The more that these processes can avoid being blocked on staff time or defer to staff as a secretarial function and be more decentralized or distributed, I think the better that looks for the organization and the more we'll be able to do together.
No, thanks for the feedback, Brian. So I guess any other comments on the point that's highlighted here before we move on? All right, the next one I raised here is something I've had in the back of my head for a while. I'd be curious to get people's TAC members' opinions on this. I think, again, I keep going back to Sarah's framing because I like it. We are different in the OpenSSF than many other places. But much of the work that we do does touch other open source groups, individual projects, foundations at large. We have a lot of activity going on with the CNCF. We have activity going on through Alpha Omega to the Eclipse Foundation, the Rust Foundation, and many others. I do have a broader question / concern, and I don't know that it's necessarily super data informed, but if I project forward and I think about what does success look like for this group, I do have some concerns around, how do we formalize the relationships with other open source foundations? Are we collaborating as effectively as possible? Do we have effective communication channels around what the priorities of the board are? What the priorities around the relationships should ultimately look like? Are we competing in places where we shouldn't be competing? Are we duplicating efforts where we shouldn't be duplicating efforts? And are we engaging with projects and foundations in a way that leads to death by 1,000 paper cuts, as I wrote here? So thinking about the notion of, how can we be as clear as possible around what we are doing and what we're not doing, what we feel like is in scope and out of scope, as well as things that we expect and things that we will provide to those other peer organizations. I think again, we have a lot of good organic activity going on within the foundation. It's a question around how do we make sure that we don't dilute the impact there and cause more time and attention sorting out issues of overlap rather than necessarily being as focused as we can around having an impact. So I guess, did that make sense or any clarification I can add there? Do folks share that same concern, or is that me projecting too far out into the future? Ava and Josh's hands both went up at the same moment on my screen, so I don't know who's
Josh, go ahead if you want.
Sure, thanks, Ava. I mean, I agree with you, Bob. I don't know. I think about this a lot just because I see things happening in CNCF. I see things happening in OWASP. I see things happening here. And I mean, maybe that's just the nature of it. I don't have a good answer for it, but I don't think you're wrong seeing this. But other than, I guess, affirming your observation, I have nothing else to add.
Thanks. Ava?
I also affirm the observation. There are projects in other foundations, both within the LF and outside the LF, that certainly overlap this space. I'm going to go back to the comment made earlier that this foundation, OpenSSF, is fundamentally different than other open source foundations that I've ever worked in and am aware of, because our goal is to enable other foundations, other projects, other communities to do what they're doing better. So we will, I think, in time need more. I don't know that formalization is the right approach, but certainly more connections and more clear ways for that communication to flow bidirectionally, whether it's information or guides, knowledge sharing, or money, right? As we funnel grant money to different projects. So I think it's too early to formalize how we do that right now. We're still very much figuring that out, figuring out how we just landed PR 112. Let's get our sea legs about how we run projects in this foundation, make sure we get all the interop between projects and working groups to be well oiled. As we start forming those deeper connections to other projects and other communities over time, I think the structure there will either form out of our own good work or become a pain point we have to address, but I think it's too early right now.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Ava. All right, any other comments on this? All right. Just checking time, we do have 15 minutes, and I believe, Crow, I'm looking for your, I believe this is the same as the last agenda point that you had put on the, I want to make sure that I don't assume incorrectly there. So is that the same point, or is that
mine
still
should
the
be pretty quick.
Okay.
But I see that, do we want to have the announcement about Jay's group?
I was actually going to reorder those just in the interest of keeping the dialogue here.
Yeah, I'll
saw
be
this
quick.
bullet and I was like, wait a minute, I think this is one and the same.
Yeah,
So if it is, let's go ahead and handle this.
No,
now.
they're different.
Oh, they're different. Okay.
I have the opportunity to show up to a lot of meetings, and there are a lot of similar and related things going on. So I was curious if the TAC was interested specifically around the dictionary and then things like personas. Multiple groups have efforts in these areas or have need to input. So we started a dictionary out of the vulnerability disclosure working group, and then that got passed to the education group because we saw it was a bigger problem than just CVD terms. And then we recognized, hey, supply chain has their own nomenclature, and potentially tooling is going to have special terms and phrases. So I was curious if the TAC or the foundation is interested in creating cross working group repositories and then trying to solicit collaboration on projects like a foundation glossary or things like personas, so that as any of our groups are talking about how to engage with specific communities, we're applying the same lens. So that's my thought.
Vicky, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, so I've been a part of the conversations around that, but I want to point out that this is actually something that is much larger than just OpenSSF. All of the groups that I'm in, including outside of OpenSSF, like CISA and IETF and various other groups, and even SPDX, which is LF but not OpenSSF. They all are. Each one of them in the past, like 6, 8, 9 months, however, pick a number, have had the conversation about standardizing terminology and why are you using the word that way? We use it this way and that sort of stuff. And so having an effort where OpenSSF at the very least can say, here are the terms we're using, here's what they mean. So we can be consistent across all of OpenSSF, that will be helpful. But doing that in such a way that it will also mesh very smoothly with external organizations, I think will help to ease some of this cross-pollination and collaboration, not only within OpenSSF, but most importantly, across the entire ecosystem, right? Try and share a single language. So reach across that aisle, so to speak, to OWASP, to SPDX, to CISA, and or use the materials that they and MITRE and others already have put together, and then gather a taxonomy, nomenclature, standardized metadata, bike shed on the name, I don't care, but this is a really valuable resource that I think I'm seeing is very much overdue for the ecosystem. And I think OpenSSF is well placed to be able to do something about it.
I am going to perhaps regret saying this, but Vicky, for once I disagree with you. it's been my observation for 3 years now that we all as an industry lack consistent terms around a lot of this, because a lot of different domains, different fields of work are intersecting. So you have folks in the TCG, Trusted Computing Group, who define terms around trust and signing and attestation that intersects with the work we're doing here, that intersects with other work as well. There are multiple efforts across some foundations, very separate from the LF, also to try and create standardized lexicons. So we run the risk of first not doing nothing and having churn and duplication and confusion amongst our working groups. I think having consistency within the OpenSSF is perhaps valuable. Certainly on its face, it seems valuable, but it would hamper us because our goal is to work with other groups who have defined their own lexicon. So where we have collaboration with IETF, it's important to know the IETF's definition. Where we have collaboration with TCG, we don't need to know their definition. Where we have collaboration with Eclipse or some other foundation, we also need to know their definition. And that's going to make, again, this foundation being unique as a hub of connections to other foundations. If we try to define those terms, the bike shedding will in fact be endless, because we're not going to make other foundations change their definitions to meet our needs. That's not our goal.
I totally agree with you. And I think that we are, I don't intend to recommend that OpenSSF reinvent the wheel. Oh my God, no.
I didn't think you would.
Never reinvent the wheel.
Okay.
But collecting in one spot, be it a repository, a document, I don't care, pick the implementation of choice. Here are all the terms that we are using. Here are the multiple different options for them. This is the one we select. If that doesn't work for you, if you need like your OpenSSF to IETF translation guide, and have it go both ways, you can do that. But that's an implementation detail, right? That can be sorted out, but do look at how these terms are being used.
Yes.
And what you mean by them, because it really does matter. What do you mean by attestation? Yep. That's a big deal, and making sure that you can really be clear on that, and everyone can communicate more effectively in that way. I think that's going to be very important.
Addressing the confusion around words, I agree, is a critically important task.
Yes.
It's one that I've with my OSI hat on brought up inside the OSI, because even terms around the definition of open source are a bit wonky sometimes. IEEE is picking up similar work, right? It's a common challenge. I think the pandemic, frankly, has contributed to all of us realizing how different our use of terms are. So full support for me for building a lexicon, but not defining most of the terms in-house, referencing other groups' definitions in one consistent place, so we have a shared understanding. 2 thumbs up for me.
Arno, I see your hand raised. I do want to also be cognizant we have 1 or 2 other things on the agenda, so I'll ask.
Yeah, just quickly, I just wanted to say, I think the 2 are not exclusive. I mean, you can, adopt other terminology and recognize other terminologies when necessary when you're dealing with other organizations. But I think differences happen by accident, just because people, if they don't have a reference already to rely on, they will come up with something. And having a common, terminology that's available, it doesn't have to be, prescriptive. You must use those terms, but at least it's like, hey, if you don't know, try those, would actually, decrease the number of accidental differences.
So I think that's a great point. I think my 2 cents is, yes, I think having some guidance and consistency within the OpenSSF, absolutely plus 1. Trying to reconcile it across different foundations, maybe aspirational. I don't know how much return you'll get on that, but I think in the interest of even terminology, as we found through 112, when we say SIG, we mean SIG. When we say working group, we mean working group, and we make sure that we're all on the same page is crucially important. So if that if we need to create a lexicon for that, then I would totally be supportive of that work. All right. With that, I want to go back quickly to this list here. Looking at the list of opportunities, given that we're not going to have a ton of time on the GB call, are just a quick poll. I heard general consensus that term length, electorate, and these bullets that I'm highlighting here all seem to resonate as things that TAC members wanted to have discussed. Heard the interop point seemed to get some +1s. Are there any other omissions that we think are useful to bring up in the context of the GB meeting, or things that folks do not feel is appropriate to bring up as questions to the board? Crow.
I think zeroing in on those two probably give you the most value out of the first interaction with the GB, and we can always add the others in going forward.
All right, great. I put a line in the doc. I'll try to, again, formalize this later today, send it out to the TAC, and make sure that folks have a public doc that they can edit, and ultimately we'll take into the meeting on Thursday. Again, your attendance is welcome, and TAC members' attendance is welcome and encouraged at the governing board meeting on Thursday. All right, last thing on the agenda, Jay, I wanted to give you a moment to quickly recognize the recent addition of a new SIG to the Supply Chain Integrity Working Group.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Great. Well, yeah, exciting times, right? Exciting times. We're we got voted in yesterday to the Supply Chain Integrity Working Group to create a SIG or a project as it were. I think we may end up becoming a project. All to be discussed internal, but exciting times. This has given us a great opportunity to do something that I think is amazing, not just for the OpenSSF, but I think for all the organizations that are going to put their hands on this, put their hands on SALSA. I think we're going to do something wonderful here, and I'm very appreciative of everyone's efforts. Crow, David Wheeler. I mean, I mentioned their names because they were the first individuals that Adrian and I came to and sat down with to discuss this, and they've been great supporters, and so this is wonderful. I'm excited. I procedurally I wanted to bring it to the TAC. Okay, so and Bob just said this is a SIG, so it's so excellent doing a SIG there. I wanted to bring this to the TAC as a formality and make sure that we dotted our I's and crossed our T's according to the efforts that have been done to get to get the proper governance in place around how things like this get brought into the OpenSSF and get brought into working groups. I wanted to make sure I covered all bases with that. But like I said, very appreciative, amazing support, and let's get to work.
Awesome. Thanks, Jay. Yeah, as I put in the chat, I think at the moment there's no, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, certainly here, there's no desire to ship a piece of software as the work underneath the working group. This is aimed at thinking about pulling together a specification under the context of the supply chain working group in position with SALSA and the other efforts that are there. So given that we don't have a software deliverable with IP review and things like that to handle, it's my impression that this is essentially a SIG at this point, and if there is a desire to create a project, we would need to follow the process in the TAC repository.
Right.
Got it. All right. So yes, Crow, you are correct. We did have somebody new asking to join. So again, it was small numbers, not zero, but certainly welcome. Glad to hear that we've got some forward momentum here. That's awesome, and let us know how we can help. All right. Last closing comment, as Brian put in the chat, we don't have great notes from today's conversation. If there are key points that you feel like need to be added into the dialogue based on what we've chatted about here today, please feel free to update the meeting notes to reflect that. Otherwise, we will hopefully see some of you on the governing board call on Thursday. And with that, I think we're at time. So thanks everybody for your engagement today. Appreciate the dialogue, and we'll catch y'all later.